a story about the strange journey of a man who lost his faith and found the light again through mysterious knocks from a world he could not explain. Chapter 1. Calling the Abyss by Name. January. Montana was as cold as a world that had just been forgotten. Snow-covered mountains stood silent, old pine trees sagged in the wind, and the small town of Bridger was swallowed in a strange stillness, as if even time itself was holding its breath. Daniel Whitaker, 58, woke up at 5:42 a.m. without an alarm. He always rose early, a habit left over from his military days, even though he'd been discharged nearly 3 decades ago. His one-story log cabin sat beside a pine forest about 2 miles from town, empty, cold, just like his life since Mary had gone. Mary had died of ovarian cancer 3 years earlier. The battle lasted 11 months, far shorter than the promise they once whispered beneath the church dome on a radiant June day, together until the end. Daniel lit the wood-burning stove and poured black coffee into a chipped ceramic mug, the one that had belonged to Mary. He kept it like something sacred, not for its function, but for the habit. Sometimes he told himself that if he drank coffee from her mug, she might stay a little longer. The house was so quiet, Daniel could hear the wind slipping through the cracks in the door, the soft knock of dry branches against the glass. Outside, it was still pitch black. He sat in the wooden chair by the window, staring into nothing. Every morning was the same. Coffee, silence, memory, and eyes gazing blankly toward the deep woods, as if searching for something nameless. Where is God in all of this? He muttered. The question had become familiar, like a prayer he no longer believed in, but still recited because he didn't know what else to do. Daniel had once been a man of faith. In his youth, he sang in the church choir, joined the Scouts, and entered the military, believing that ideals and belief in God would keep his spine straight through a chaotic world. But Mary's death tore that sacred part wide open. The coffee cooled. Daniel closed his eyes and tried to pray, something he still attempted every morning, though lately it felt more like calling an old number no one answered anymore. At 6:17 a.m., he heard a sound on the front porch. A soft knock, maybe. Strange. No one usually came by his house, especially in winter. He pulled on a sweater and stepped outside. The wind slapped his face. No one. But something was there, a small object left on the porch bench. A book. No, not quite a book. An old Bible, worn leather cover, dark brown like it had once been soaked in rain and left to dry. Daniel frowned. No footprints in the snow, except his own. The sky was thick and gray. Snow fell quietly. He bent down and picked it up. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from something else. That eerie feeling you get when you see something familiar in a place it shouldn't be, and you can't explain why it's there. Inside the front cover was a small folded note. The handwriting was tilted but clear. Not everyone who calls my name will hear my reply, but those who are silent in pain will hear what no one else can. Elijah? He frowned. The name echoed like a voice from Scripture, the legendary prophet of the Old Testament, the one who never died but was carried into heaven in a chariot of fire. But why Elijah? And why would someone leave this Bible at his door on a freezing morning with no footprints? Daniel brought the Bible inside and set it on the table. He poured a fresh cup of coffee and opened to the first page. No name, just a few underlined verses, some notes scribbled in blue ink. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. Isaiah 43:2, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those who love God. His heart gave a strange, sudden ache. Those words, he had known them, once taught them to young recruits in the deserts of Iraq, but now they felt like echoes of something long gone, a song he couldn't remember the lyrics to. That night, Daniel didn't turn on the TV. He sat by the fireplace, the Bible resting on his lap. Snow fell heavier. He read slowly, line by line, verse by verse, and somewhere deep in his heart something softened, like the first crack of thaw on a long frozen lake. Near midnight, he drifted off on the sofa. In his dream, he was standing in a field of tall reeds under a twilight sky. A man approached. He wore a long robe, and his face was hidden by light. The man handed him a book and said, "Not to remember me, but to remember yourself." Daniel jolted awake, his heart raced. The Bible was still in his hands. The fire had burned down to embers, but the cold no longer bit like it used to. There was something in the air, not clear but warmer, a tiny sliver of hope, like a seed touching soft soil. He looked up at the ceiling, and for the first time in 3 years he whispered, "If you're still there, I'm still listening." Chapter 2. The first sign. The next morning the sun rose slowly, as if tired from the persistent cold. A faint light filtered through the frost-covered window, shining on the Bible still resting on the table. Daniel Whitaker stood at the sink, washing Mary's coffee mug. His hands were rough, calloused, trembling slightly from age and old wounds, both physical and emotional. But this morning, he didn't feel completely alone. Something had shifted. Small, but enough for him to notice. He wasn't one to believe in mystical things. 15 years in the military, 3 years counseling veterans, then caring for his wife until her passing, these had shaped him into a practical man. But today, the way the Bible appeared, the strange dream of a man in the dim light, he couldn't dismiss it as coincidence. Not to remember me, but for you to remember yourself. The words still echoed in his mind. They sounded like a riddle or a calling. After a simple breakfast of fried eggs and burnt toast, Daniel put on his thick coat, slipped on his gloves, and went outside to shovel snow from the porch. He looked out at the small forest behind his house. The snow lay thicker than usual, blanketing everything in white. Then he heard it, faint, fragile, like the sound of labored breathing or a soft whimper. He paused, listening. The sound came from the trees, about 20 meters away. Without hesitation, he stepped through the deep snow, his walking stick in hand like an old instinct. After a few minutes of searching, he spotted a young deer trapped in the rusted wire fence of an abandoned farm nearby. Its eyes were wide with fear. One hind leg was tangled in barbed wire, and blood had stained the snow red. Daniel approached slowly, speaking softly, his voice soothing like he was calming a child. "It's okay, I'll help you. Don't be afraid." The deer trembled but didn't flee. It was as if it understood. Daniel took out his folding knife and began cutting through the wire, one twisted loop at a time. It took nearly 15 minutes, but finally, the deer was free. It stood shakily, looked at him for a moment, its deep brown eyes seeming to say thank you, then stumbled off into the woods. Daniel let out a long breath and sat down in the snow, his heart pounding. Maybe it was age, maybe something else. A feeling, old, very old, came over him, like the time in his youth when he saved a badly wounded soldier on the battlefield. That young man had clutched Daniel's hand and cried like a child. Today, Daniel felt the same. No longer hard as stone, but soft like soil in spring. He stood up and returned home. As he took off his coat, he froze. Inside the inner pocket, a place he was sure he hadn't placed anything, was a small, folded piece of paper. The handwriting matched yesterday's. "Each time you save a life, yours is being saved again. Elijah." Daniel stiffened. His hands shook. Who had put that note in his pocket? No one had come near him. He'd been alone. His house had security cameras, but he hadn't seen anyone all day. "Elijah again," he muttered. That afternoon, he decided to drive into town. On the way, he stopped at a roadside gas station, one he'd rarely visited since Mary passed. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman with curly hair, glasses, and a chestnut sweater. As he set a water bottle on the counter, she smiled. "Hello there, it's been a while." Daniel nodded. "I live out by the woods. Don't come into town much." She looked at him more closely. "I'm Grace. I used to be a nurse at the East Clinic. You probably don't remember." Daniel gave a polite smile and nod. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I volunteer at the White House, where we serve food for the homeless. Just drop by." He turned back, surprised. "White House?" Grace laughed. "Not in Washington. It's that old White House on 3rd Street. Locals call it that as a joke." Daniel chuckled, his first smile in months. "I'll remember." On the drive home, snow began to fall lightly. The late afternoon sun cast a soft gold over the frozen lake near his house. As he parked, Daniel glanced into the rearview mirror. Reflected in the distance, near the forest's edge, stood a man. A long coat, a beanie hat, his face unclear. When Daniel turned around, the figure was gone. No footprints, no sound, only trees. That night, Daniel sat by the fireplace, hand resting on the Bible. It no longer felt like a strange object. It was an anchor, the only thing that seemed able to reconnect him with the world he thought had abandoned him. He read Psalm 42 slowly. My soul thirsts for God, like a deer pants for water by the stream. He placed his hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow and warm. Something was calling his name. Not loud, not dramatic, but soft, like breath, like wind slipping through a barely opened door. Elijah, he whispered, if you're real, I will come find you. Chapter 3: The Forgotten Ones. 2 days after seeing the figure at the forest's edge, Daniel woke early as usual. The snow still fell, but the sky had a pale sunlight. He brewed coffee, staring at the Bible on the table as if waiting for it to speak. He picked up a pen, opened an old notebook, and wrote 3 words: White House, 3rd Street. Then he dressed and left home. Bridgertown was still quiet on Wednesday morning. The small shops remained closed. Street lamps blinked yellow, lonely in the dawn. But at the far end of 3rd Street, a white-painted house appeared. Its metal roof rusted, its windows foggy, but with a light glowing inside. On the wooden gate, a hand-painted sign read, Food and Prayer Center, everyone welcome. Daniel stood hesitating for a few seconds, his hand resting on the latch. He didn't know why he was here, but he had come, and maybe that alone was a step. Inside, the smell of hot soup and fresh bread filled the air. About 10 people, mostly elderly or homeless, sat around tables. A silver-haired woman poured coffee. In the corner, an older black man hummed Amazing Grace. And in the center of the room was Grace, the woman from the gas station, smiling, serving food, wiping tables. She saw Daniel and walked over. You really came? Daniel smiled faintly, hesitant. I just came to look around. Just sit. You don't need to do anything. Just being here is enough for a beginning. Daniel sat down on an empty chair. A moment later, a man beside him offered a hand. I'm Max. Used to be a math teacher. Now I live on soup and kindness. Daniel nodded, unsure of what to say. Max looked at him for a moment, then said, You don't look like you belong here. You carry the eyes of someone who lost something and is looking to find it again. Daniel froze. Max continued slowly. Most of us didn't lose our homes because of poverty, but because we were forgotten, by family, by friends, then by ourselves. Those words, forgotten, echoed inside Daniel like a sound from a deep cave. He remembered the months living like a shadow after Mary died. No one visited, no one asked. But he didn't blame them. He'd closed the door first. After the meal, Grace invited Daniel to help wash dishes. The two stood side by side in the small kitchen. She asked, Were you in the military? Daniel looked surprised. How do you know? The way you stand. Back straight, shoulders tense, eyes always watching the exits. People who've seen battle carry habits for life. He chuckled softly, nodding. What about you? Why volunteer here? Grace dried her hands, thoughtful. I lost a child to an overdose. After that, I nearly lost myself. Until one day, I read a verse in the Bible. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. I no longer have that child, but I thought, if I can still do something kind, then I will try. Daniel stayed silent. He understood. Pain teaches people to live differently. Not easier, but truer. Before leaving the White House, Max pressed a small paper into Daniel's hand. Found this yesterday under a chair. No one claimed it, but I think it belongs to you. Daniel opened it. The handwriting was familiar. Every forgotten soul is a call the world no longer hears, but those who listen will hear the sacred. Daniel looked up, heart pounding. He glanced around. No one reacted strangely to the note, as if it had appeared on its own. The 3rd time, same handwriting. Elijah, who are you? He wondered. Then a question rose clearly in his mind. If God wants us to seek him, could he be hiding among those no one sees? That afternoon, Daniel didn't go home right away. He drove slowly around town, noticing, for the first time, people he used to pass by. An old woman pushing a cart full of empty cans. A young man lying under the porch of an abandoned church, hugging a sick dog. A pregnant girl waiting in line for food donations. All of them invisible yet alive in the silent struggle of the forgotten. Daniel returned home after dark. He opened the Bible, not searching for a specific passage, letting the pages fall where they would. It landed on Matthew 25:40. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. His heart warmed, not with blinding light, but with a quiet fullness. as if God was speaking without words. And for the first time in many years, Daniel whispered, "Lord, if you are hidden among the least, give me eyes to see and a heart that won't turn away." Chapter 4. Wounds Without Blood. Daniel woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. The dream had been too real, as if someone had forced it into his mind instead of letting it come on its own. In the dream, he was back on the battlefield. No bombs falling, no gunfire, just a young soldier, his face covered in blood, looking up at Daniel and asking, "Why didn't you come back for me?" That voice, hoarse, pained, filled with accusation, belonged to no one but Michael Rise, the young soldier who had died under Daniel's command more than 25 years ago. Daniel sat up and washed his face. He couldn't go back to sleep. That memory, once locked away in an invisible box and weighed down with the excuse it was war, was now open. And he knew, if he didn't face it, it would devour his soul bit by bit. The next morning, Daniel returned to the White House. The sky was gray, clouds heavy like they were holding back the world's unshed tears. Inside, people were preparing to serve dinner for over 30 individuals. Grace smiled when she saw him. "You're just in time. We could use another hand handing out the food bags." Daniel gave a small nod. "What can I do?" "Just stand by the door, greet them, say their names if you remember, and look them in the eyes." That last part made him pause. Look them in the eyes. Simple, but not easy. Daniel got to work. An hour passed. Then a man walked in. Bearded, tattered coat, sharp eyes. No one greeted him. No one spoke. A brief silence stretched out. Daniel felt something familiar. The man looked up, and he recognized him. Luis Reyes, Michael's younger brother. Blood rushed to Daniel's face. His hand clenched the paper bag so tightly it wrinkled. Luis stepped forward, his eyes cold as steel. "Didn't expect to see you here," Daniel swallowed. I didn't know you lived in Bridger." Luis's voice was low and tight. "I don't live, I survive, and by God's grace, I don't hate you anymore." Daniel bowed his head. "I've thought about it for 25 years. I'm sorry, Luis." The man stared at him for a long moment. "You're sorry for my brother's death?" "No, for never visiting your family, for being too much of a coward to look pain in the eye. I chose silence. I chose retreat, and that choice killed a part of me." Luis took a deep breath. "I used to think you were heartless, but now I see a man broken by what he couldn't fix." A long pause. Then Luis said, "I won't fully forgive you, but today I'll take the food bag from your hand." Daniel held it out. Luis took it. Their hands touched for a second, but Daniel felt as if his soul had been touched. At the end of the evening, when everyone had left, Grace handed Daniel a small piece of paper. This turned up on the table again. "The boy who cleansed found it. No one knows who left it." Daniel unfolded it. The handwriting was the same, clear, familiar. Forgiveness doesn't erase memory, but it opens the door so memory stops punishing. Elijah. Daniel sat down, trembling slightly. He looked out the window. The sky was gray, but there was a thin band of light between the clouds. Like that first act of forgiveness, not brilliant, not perfect, but enough to keep walking. He pulled out his notebook and wrote, "Michael Rise, I never forgot you, and I never forgave myself. But today I begin learning how to live without imprisoning myself in the past." That night, Daniel returned home, opened the Bible, and for the first time read it not to find answers, but just to listen. He stopped at John 20:27 when Jesus appeared after the resurrection. "Put your finger here. Do not doubt, but believe." Daniel smiled faintly. There are wounds that don't bleed, but if we dare to look at them, they can become the path back to the light. Chapter 5. A Pilgrim in His Own Home. The little wooden cabin in the woods where Daniel had lived for nearly a decade had never felt this quiet. Not the cold kind of quiet that marked his years of isolation, but a warm stillness, like the wind pausing so you can hear your own heartbeat. That afternoon, Daniel didn't go to the White House. He felt a strong, undeniable urge to stay home. Not to avoid, but to face. He stood in the hallway, looking at the old bedroom where he and Mary once shared a bed, where sleepless nights of worry were mixed with midnight laughter. The door still had faint claw marks, traces from the days Mary fought cancer, delirious with pain. Daniel stepped inside. Everything was still there. The dress she loved hanging in the corner, the old romance novel open to page 127, and the unfinished letter she'd never sent, Only the first line. If I go before you, promise me this. Don't close your heart to the world. He sat on the bed, letter in hand, heart heavy. And then he cried. Not out of sorrow, but because he finally allowed himself to cry, after years of living like a ghost. Daniel went down to the basement, once packed with old boxes he'd hidden to avoid seeing them. Now he turned on the light and opened each one. The second box held photo albums, young Mary, a vacation in Arizona, Christmas with their daughter Elise, the daughter he'd grown distant from for years after a pointless argument. The last photo in the stack was Elise at 17, guitar in hand, eyes glowing, her mother beside her, smiling with love. Daniel held the photo, his heart aching. He couldn't remember the last time he'd called her. Maybe 4 years ago, maybe 5, he wasn't sure. Just like with God, he used to think his daughter had vanished from his life. But the truth was, he was the one who had cut the cord. He opened his notebook and wrote, "My daughter, Elise, is still alive, and I still have time to find her, if I'm brave enough." That night, Daniel sat in his old armchair. He turned on the radio, a habit from his youth. The station played an old song, Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel. The voice sang like a whisper, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. Daniel closed his eyes. He imagined Mary sitting beside him, her hand on his shoulder. And in that moment, he realized something strange. God doesn't only appear in the faces of the broken, not only in the words of Scripture, but also in old laughter, in searing memories, in the house he once thought was the grave of love. Now it might be a place to begin again. As usual, he found another slip of paper, this time under the reading lamp. No one else had been in the house all day, but it was there, the same handwriting. A pilgrim is not one who goes far, but one who dares return to the place they feared most, Elijah. Daniel chuckled softly. Elijah, you're really driving me mad. Then he whispered, thank you. He stood, went into his study, and searched his contacts for Elise's number. It was still there, untouched for years. His hand trembled slightly, but he pressed the button. It rang. Once, twice, hello? Elise's voice older, but still hers. Daniel's voice caught. Hi, it's Dad. A pause. Then she said softly, Dad? And just like that, he knew the journey home had begun. Chapter 6, The Ones Who Carried Light. That weekend, the White House welcomed an unusual group of visitors. 7 young people from a small church in Colorado. They had driven nearly 1,000 miles to Bridger to help repair roofs for the homeless and host an outdoor community meal. Daniel watched them from a distance. T-shirts printed with Bible verses, backpacks full of duct tape, hammers, and even a mini coffee maker. A red-haired girl carried a ukulele and wore a constant smile. A dark-skinned young man bowed his head in prayer every 5 minutes, whether he was sawing wood or installing a door. They were loud, a bit chaotic, but there was something about them that Daniel couldn't turn away from. Grace introduced them. This is the Firelight Group, kids I used to teach in summer Bible school. They're grown now. They wanted to do something silly and kind for spring break. Daniel smiled. Silly and kind. Sounds like God's in every step they take. Grace nodded. Exactly. The next day, Daniel helped the young group dismantle the tin roof of an old shed. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but oddly, his spirit felt younger. At one point, the dark-skinned boy, his name was Marcus, sat beside him to rest. I heard you're a veteran, Marcus said. I've never been to a battlefield, but you know, sir, this world's a battlefield too. Only now, the bullets come as words, and the wounds are made of silence. Daniel looked up at him. Where'd you learn that? I'm not sure. Maybe from God, maybe from TikTok. Daniel chuckled. Your generation's strange. Marcus stayed quiet for a moment. Do you still believe in God? Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at the hammer in his hand, then said, maybe. Every time I help someone patch a roof or call the child I once lost touch with, then maybe I'm believing. Marcus nodded. Faith isn't about understanding. It's about walking even when you can't see the whole path. That evening, the group hosted an outdoor meal. The sunset poured across the lawn behind the White House, red as wine. Over 50 people, both homeless and volunteers, ate hot soup and listened to live music. The red-haired girl, Lena, held her ukulele and started singing You Say by Lauren Daigle. Her voice wasn't perfect, but something about it made Daniel fall silent. When she reached the lines, You say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. Daniel suddenly felt his eyes sting. He looked around. People who once slept under bridges were smiling. Lena closed her eyes, tapping to the rhythm of the breeze. Marcus bowed his head in silent prayer. Amid the music, the clinking of spoons against bowls, and the laughter of children, Daniel no longer heard the shouting inside himself. He heard life. As the group cleaned up, Daniel found a slip of paper beneath a chair. He wasn't surprised anymore. He picked it up and read, "It's not just the old who need forgiveness. Sometimes the young just need someone to believe they carry light." Elijah. Daniel folded the paper and slipped it into his shirt pocket. He looked up at the sky, where a few stars had started to twinkle, and he thought, maybe I've been a broken man, but tonight I saw the light, not through a miracle, but through soup, a song, and the quiet faith of a generation that hasn't given up. Chapter 7. The Midnight Call. The little kitchen was warm with the smell of hand-brewed coffee. The clock on the wall showed nearly midnight. Daniel sat there, holding a light brown ceramic cup, eyes fixed on the phone. Though the first call had come a few days ago, Elise had only spoken a few words before asking to hang up. But tonight, she was the one calling back. "Dad, I can't talk long, but I want to try." Her voice was still soft but firmer now. Daniel set the cup down and took a deep breath. "I'm ready," he said. At first, there was silence, not awkward, but like two people walking slowly along a lakeshore after the rain. No one rushed. Every word placed carefully like stones laid across a broken bridge. "Elise, I'm sorry I left you alone. I don't blame you anymore, at least not as much. I was so afraid to face my own pain, I didn't realize you were carrying yours alone. I used to wish you weren't the strong, silent type, just a dad who listened." Daniel gripped the phone tighter. On the other end, Elise sighed. "I used to think if Mom had lived, things would be different." "They would, but your mom died, and I ran away while you grew up in that emptiness." For the first time, Daniel let himself truly hear it, without arguing, without defending, just listening, letting it sink in. Then Elise told him about her life now. She was working at a public library in Salt Lake City, still played guitar, had a cat named Socrates. "Do you have a boyfriend?" Daniel asked cautiously. Elise laughed. "I do, but he hates cats, so maybe not for long." They both laughed, the first laugh in nearly 7 years, and it wasn't forced. It was real. Near the end of the call, Daniel took a risk. "Would you be open to seeing me? No rush someday." Elise cut in. I want to come to Bridger next month. I still remember the road by the lake and Mom." A short pause, then she added, "I miss you too, Dad." Daniel couldn't speak. He just lifted his head as tears fell without warning. "I miss you too, more than anything." The call ended at 12:39 a.m. Daniel sat still for a long time. The house was silent, but no longer cold. He stood, stepped onto the porch, and looked at the sky. The breeze was light, the leaves rustled softly, and beneath his feet, someone had left another small slip of paper. He picked it up. The handwriting was familiar, but this time simpler, almost a whisper. "Love, if it truly comes from God, will always find a way back." Daniel placed a hand over his heart, and for the first time in years, he whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, I'm not worthy, but if you still give me time, I'll use it to love." Chapter 8, Campfire Night and the Words Unspoken. That night, under the moonlight, the Firelight group gathered around a blazing campfire. The flames danced. Silhouettes flickered between light and shadow, painting a vivid picture of connection. The scent of smoke, the crackle of breaking branches, and the sound of laughter echoed in the stillness of the night. Daniel sat with them, feeling like part of something greater than himself. Marcus sat nearby, head bowed, arms wrapped around his knees. Lena, ukulele in hand, was about to play a song, but before she strummed, Grace stood, her gaze warm as she addressed the group. "Does anyone want to share something?" she asked, her voice gentle, as if inviting something deeply buried in each heart. The teens were silent. Everyone glanced around, but no one spoke. Daniel could feel the weight of that silence. It wasn't reluctance, but the fear of confronting the stories they each carried inside. After a long pause, Lena spoke. "My mom died when I was 15, and I never really accepted it. Since she passed, I felt like I lost a part of myself. I play music, but sometimes when I play, I just feel alone. She stared into the fire, her eyes not as bright as usual. But today, when I saw you, Daniel, I realized something. Even if we've lost something vital, maybe, if we're still here, there's a reason. And I can still create something from the broken pieces. Daniel looked at her. What she said wasn't just a young girl's story. It echoed the pain he'd known. Loss, loneliness, the feeling of not being able to go on. But she had found a way to face it. Grace took Lena's ukulele and played a soft melody. Marcus stood up, stepped into the shadows, then returned, eyes red. With courage, he spoke. I'm not someone who usually shares, but today, I want to say something. The group grew still. All eyes turned to Marcus. I didn't used to believe in God. I lived my own way, worked my own way. Then I lost my mom. I didn't see any reason to keep going. But then I met this group, and I realized maybe I don't understand everything about God, but I can't do life alone. I can't walk alone. He paused, then added, I don't know if God is real, but I know I need others, and I can't keep standing by myself. Daniel felt something shift inside. This boy, with such fragile faith, had more strength than many who claimed unwavering belief. The fire still burned, and now it was Daniel's turn. He took a deep breath, meeting the eyes of the young people around him. Facing their gaze, he felt something begin, a chance not only to share but to heal. Back in the day, I was a soldier. I used to think only the strong could survive. But then I lost Mary, and I didn't know how to go on. I tormented myself, avoided my grief, because I thought I couldn't afford to be weak. He looked into the fire, its red glow flickering in his eyes. But today, seeing all of you, I realized something. It's not physical strength or sheer willpower we need. It's the courage to face the truth, that we can't do everything alone. He looked at Lena, Marcus, and the rest. God never leaves us. He may be silent, but he's still there, always there, especially when we need him most. A long silence settled over the circle, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was a silence of understanding. Everyone felt it, even if no one said a word. As the fire dwindled and people began to leave, Daniel felt lighter, not because of the words shared, but because they had all opened their hearts. And in the dark, among the flames, he realized healing comes not from hiding pain, but from daring to face and share it. For the first time in years, Daniel truly felt he belonged. Chapter 9. Rediscovering Oneself. The first light of a new day streamed through the wooden cabin's window, casting soft rays across the old rugs and the dusty dining table. Daniel sat by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand, staring out into the garden. Just yesterday, Elise had called him. They hadn't said much, but just hearing her voice was enough to warm his heart. It was a strange feeling. He had lived for decades without realizing he could be loved again. But now, that possibility no longer felt so distant. Even though he knew Elise would come at the end of the month, there was no guarantee they could easily reclaim what was lost. He wasn't even sure if he could stay grounded when the emotions inevitably surged. A soft knock on the door echoed. It was Grace. She stepped in with a gentle smile, carrying a cloth bag filled with cookies. Good morning, Daniel. I thought you might need a little energy for today. Thank you, Grace. Daniel smiled, taking the bag and pulling out a cookie. The warm scent of butter and baked sugar filled the room. Grace sat down beside him. I know you're worried about Elise, but remember, nothing can be rushed. What you need right now is time for yourself, to understand what you want and what you need to heal. Everything will slowly fall into place if you can face yourself. Daniel took a sip of coffee, his eyes drifting to the horizon where the sun had begun to rise higher. He'd heard those words from Grace many times before, but today they struck his mind with a new force. Easier said than done, isn't it? Daniel sighed. Yes, but if you never try, you'll never know. Grace replied, her voice still soft but filled with resolve. Bringing peace to yourself is the first step, Daniel. If you can't do that, you won't be able to help others. Daniel looked into Grace's eyes. He knew she wasn't just talking about Elise. She was talking about him, about the healing he needed to truly live as himself. The next day, as gentle winds swept away the morning mist, Daniel decided to do something he had never dared before. He would go to church. It had been so long since he last stepped inside, even though that place had once felt closest to God. His steps were slow as he walked in. No one else was there, only rays of light filtering through the stained glass windows, only the sound of his footsteps and his own breath. He stood before the altar, lifting his gaze to the images of Christ and the saints. His heart swelled with indescribable emotion. He didn't know where to begin or how to pray. It felt like standing before an old friend, but not knowing what to say. Finally, Daniel spoke a simple sentence. God, I've been away for so long, but if you're still here, I want to begin again. A silence settled over the room. No blinding light, no strange sounds. But inside Daniel, he felt something very gentle, like a small boat just pushed off from shore, gliding on calm waves. A few days later, when Elise finally arrived in Bridger, Daniel didn't know how to prepare or what to say. He simply met her at the train station, the same station where 20 years ago he had seen her off to college. Back then, too, he hadn't known what life would be like without her. But this time, he wasn't saying goodbye. And perhaps this wasn't just any reunion. When Elise stepped off the bus, she looked around and saw Daniel. Her eyes lit up with a mild surprise, but there was no awkwardness. She walked quickly toward him and embraced him, a hug with no words, but with everything that needed to be said. "Dad, I'm really home," Elise whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. Daniel said nothing. He simply held her tighter, as if his whole life had poured into that moment. A change, not from words, but from action, from presence. That night, after dinner and long conversations about the past days, Daniel sat at the table and wrote a letter. Sometimes we find ourselves not through grand things, but through the small and simple. I can't fix the past, but I can build the future. Thank you for coming back. I love you more than anything in this life, Daniel. When he finished, he gently put the pen down and looked out the window. A peace he had never known filled his heart. He had found himself again. Chapter 10, A New Beginning. That morning, Daniel woke with a different feeling. The sunlight filtered through the window and lit up his old wooden table, but today it wasn't just light. It carried with it a sense of renewal. After years of loneliness and painful memories, he now felt a rebirth within his soul. The fragments of the past seemed to be aligning, like an unfinished painting beginning to take clear shape. Elise had stayed with him all week, and during that time, they had long conversations. Laughter, silences shared, but most importantly, moments of true listening. Elise had shared much about her life, the changes in her, and what relieved Daniel most was her acceptance of him. She didn't ask for a perfect father, she just wanted him to be himself. When she stepped into the kitchen that morning, her eyes were full of tenderness. She had grown up, and there was something steady in her every step. "Dad, I want to take a walk. Want to come?" Elise asked, holding a light jacket. "Of course, sweetheart," Daniel replied, standing up, feeling a quiet familiarity in those steps, as if they had never been apart. Walking the trail around the lake, Daniel and Elise remained silent for a while, listening only to the falling leaves and the wind passing through. No words were needed. They had found a natural harmony. The memories of their years apart faded in that moment. In their place, something new began to bloom. Love. A love not weighed down by regrets or past mistakes, but one built on understanding and forgiveness. "Dad, I know we can't change the past, but I've realized I can't keep living in it," Elise said, looking at her father, her voice soft yet steady. "I need to face what I feel instead of running from it." Daniel looked at his daughter, his heart expanding. He didn't need to say more. They understood each other. They were both trying to take new steps in life. "When I look at you, I realize something," Daniel began, his voice warm. "You have a strength I never noticed before. I didn't pay attention to what you needed all those years, and I'm sorry for that." Elise smiled. "It's okay, Dad. I understand, but now I feel different. I don't feel alone anymore. And you don't either, right?" Daniel nodded, feeling power in her words. "That's right, sweetheart. I found myself again." They walked a little farther until they reached a large tree by the lake, where they used to sit together every afternoon when Elise was little. It was where they shared small stories, dreams, and even unspoken sadness. Now, standing under that tree, they felt as though they'd returned to the past, not to escape, but to heal. "Dad, I want to ask you something," Elise said, looking deep into his eyes. "Are you ready to open your heart?" Not just for me, but for yourself too? Can you start again? Daniel took a deep breath. He understood this question wasn't just about rekindling their relationship, but about opening himself up and accepting what he couldn't change. He had run from pain, denied his feelings, but now he knew if he wanted to move forward, he had to do something very important: face himself. "I'm ready, Elise. I'm ready to start over." That day after the walk, as they returned home, Daniel realized that not only had he found his daughter again, he had also found himself. He wasn't the man he once imagined he'd be, a man so strong and tough he couldn't bear weakness. Instead, he was a father, a man who could admit his faults, and someone no longer afraid to love. That night, after a warm dinner, Daniel sat again with a pen and a piece of paper. He wasn't writing to anyone, but to himself, as a reaffirmation of the path he had walked and the hope he held for the future. "I've been lost for too long, but now I've found the light. And more importantly, I can live the rest of my days with all my heart. Thank you, God, for helping me find my daughter again. And thank you, Elise, for helping me find myself." As he put the pen down, Daniel felt an extraordinary calm. He had done something he never believed possible. He had started over, and this time, nothing would stop him.